I think like most nights we put the kids to bed and then I pulled my laptop out and was sitting on the couch working for several hours. And it had been like multiple consecutive days in a row that I had to do that. And my husband just looked at me and he goes, close your laptop. I was like, what? And he said, we have to talk. You cannot keep doing this. Like, do you want your kids to look back on this time and just say, oh, mom was always working? You don't want that. And I think that was the wake up call that I needed to realize, like, whoa, my loyalty has led me to really poor boundaries. And, I probably should have said no a number of times, but I think also there's the loyalty piece, there's the empathy piece. And I think the empathy side of me was also trying to protect other people on my team from being overloaded. And so I was taking on all of these things. And I think it ultimately led to that intervention with my husband and realizing he's right. I can't keep doing this. This is too much.
How does a boss mama set up boundaries at work so that she can spend time with family and self-care while being an effective leader and not experiencing all that guilt? Today, we're talking with Aarika Lim Riddle. Aarika is half Chinese and half white, and she shares with us her journey growing up in Hawaii and actually experiencing racism because she's half white, and then later living in the mainland and experiencing the benefits of being white. In her boss mama journey, Aarika also shares how after graduating from California Lutheran University, she has a career in nonprofit and eventually becomes an executive director at Reading Partners, a nonprofit focused on supporting children with reading. She eventually finds herself in her current role as executive director of Christy Yamaguchi's nonprofit, Always Dream. On this journey, Aarika works hard and she finds herself really burnt out. And with 2 kids, her husband takes her aside and has an intervention. Aarika realizes that she needs better boundaries. In Boss Mamas, we often talk about how we call our community, which includes having conversations with the people around us at work and at home about what we need and holding our boundaries. Aarika is a great example of this. She shares with us her steps for establishing boundaries and what it meant for her. And she also shares what that means for her in terms of what it opened up for self-care and focused family time. I'm really excited for you to meet this boss mama. Hey, Aarika, it is so great to be talking with you. One of the things that attracted me to us talking was actually our shared background in having lived in Hawaii. And in fact, your family lived in Hawaii for generations. So I was curious, how do you identify? People, look at you and say, what's your background? What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, Hawaii is a big part of who I am. So I'm not shy about leading with, I'm from Hawaii and I'm half Chinese.
Yes, that makes sense. And it's interesting, Aarika, you being half white and half Chinese, there is an interesting, while beautifully mixed in terms of the racial makeup of the people of Hawaii, there is also racism, as many states in America have. Could you talk about that growing up half Chinese?
Well, growing up half Chinese, but then also just growing up in Hawaii, it's the melting pot of the Pacific. So you've got pretty much the majority of the population in Hawaii is either some sort of Asian or Pacific Islander, ethnicity or race, and white people are actually the minority. And so being half white and half Chinese, to most of my classmates growing up, they'd look at me and they go, oh, she's white. Or in Hawaii, we'd say, oh, she's Haole. And that's interesting because, I think it's one of the few places where white people are probably experiencing racism, which is so different from here on the mainland where white people are the majority. And so there were definitely times where I had to justify to people like, no, I am Chinese. This is my dad. He really is my dad. And that's an interesting thing to have to think back on now that I am living in a place where I'm no longer the minority. I'm the majority, because I think to most people, you might tell I'm a mix, but for a lot of people, I have light skin. And so I'm white, and I have the privileges that come along with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have had experienced racism as a half white person as a child in Hawaii. And then now you're able to have privilege as half white person on the mainland. So I'm curious, when did you realize, or was there a recent experience that really brought that to light, that there is privilege there, being half white?
I mean, I think everything happening with race in the country over the last few years has made me think about this a lot more than I ever had before, and understanding what privilege is and recognizing that I had it. But I think a recent experience that kind of comes to mind is, not too long ago, there were a lot of Asian hate crimes happening in Oakland, Chinatown. I live in Oakland, California, and my uncle called and was very concerned that I might be at risk or might be harmed. And, the truth of it is, I don't look Chinese. I look white, and I have, blonde hair, blue-eyed kids too. So I never felt threatened or that my safety was at risk, because I've got that privilege of having, white blood in me, and kind of the look of a white person in a lot of ways.
The unique experience, Aarika, you've had of racism, of being a prey to it, but also being able to benefit on the other side of being half white is so unique. And I know that empathy is one of your superpowers. So I'm curious, in terms of the empathy and even your identity, when you think about your kids, how are you thinking about that? Like incorporating or having them exposed to their race or background, any exploration there?
Yeah, we've been having a lot of open conversations as a family about race and privilege, and understanding and teaching them what privilege is, and learning about other cultures. That my kids are only a quarter Chinese, but we want to try to teach them about what it does mean, and kind of where their family came from. And then growing up in Hawaii, I think, is such a different experience than growing up anywhere else in the country. And so sharing that with them has been important to me as well. So, we try to go back as often as we can, a little bit harder during a pandemic, but, exposing them to different cultures and different cuisines, and trying to put themselves in the shoes of other people, and trying to teach that empathy piece to them as well is really important.
I agree. Empathy. If more people had it, even for myself, building that muscle, it's a beautiful thing and could really bring us together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So going back to your days in Hawaii, and you are dreaming of future Aarika, I'm curious if you can tell us about, what did you dream about? Did you expect you'd go to the mainland? What is your path?
Yeah, I was pretty set on leaving Hawaii. When I was applying for colleges, I actually didn't even apply to any schools in Hawaii. I definitely had the get me off this rock in the middle of the Pacific mentality. And now looking back, I'm like, wow, what a jaded 18-year-old I was. I should have had more perspective, but I left and I got it and realized what an amazing, life I've had, and opportunity to grow up in Hawaii. But I initially thought, I wanted to be a news reporter, and kind of went down the path in school of, doing that, and studying journalism, and then made a shift to public relations, and then ultimately ended up in the nonprofit world. I think because I was so driven to help other people, and was still able to bring a lot of those communication pieces into the nonprofit world. So I think that's kind of how my path took me.
So I'm going to that moment when you are now a leader, because your career path accelerated pretty quickly, and you got spotlighted and picked for different development jobs, fundraising, and you're now a leader at one of the nonprofits called Reading Partners. How are you balancing it? This thing called work-life balance, trying to be a boss mama. Bring us to your life then, even today. What was it like for you?
Yeah, it was crazy. When I started at Reading Partners and I was hired as an executive director there, I was pregnant. So I pretty much got hired and said, well, going to have to go on maternity leave in a few months. And, I was really grateful. They were very accommodating and figured out how to make that happen. So I went on maternity leave pretty shortly after starting this big role and a big step up for me. And then came back to work and felt like, gosh, I kind of owe it to them. I always have this sense of loyalty. So felt like, okay, I've got to give it my all. I've got to work really hard. I think for a while I was doing a pretty good job of balancing things, but then over time, I think started to slip and was, realizing, wow, I'm spending a lot of time working and less time with my family, which is super important to me, and really figuring out, how do I shift the balance? But I think, it got harder and harder because we had vacancies and different positions that took a long time to fill, which meant that I was taking on a lot of those responsibilities. And so, I think you go into the nonprofit world and people tell you, oh, you're going to wear a lot of hats. And I was wearing a lot of hats, but I was also wearing like 3 people's hats. So it was a lot of hats for one person. And I think that got tricky. And ultimately my husband sat me down and said, you can't keep doing this. This is not sustainable.
Wow. I want to just highlight something you said, and it's the idea of loyalty. It was a huge thing for them as a new hire, right? To hear you say, okay, I'm going on maternity leave. And as having been in that position before, part of my heart's just like, oh, we're trying to hire to fill because other people are wearing other hats. And it was very gracious and the right thing to do for them to say, of course, like, you should enjoy your baby, do your maternity leave. And yet this loyalty piece, because loyalty is a beautiful thing, but also can be very dark. So for you to see that the loyalty led you into a place where you then had to have an intervention, I just want to highlight that, because I'm very loyal myself, and it has led me to some dark places of choices, because I want to show people that I'm loyal too. So talk to us about that intervention. So were you surprised? Did he take you aside and you had a heart to heart?
I think like most nights we put the kids to bed, and then I pulled my laptop out and was sitting on the couch working for several hours. And it had been like multiple consecutive days in a row that I had to do that. And my husband just looked at me and he goes, close your laptop. I was like, what? And he said, we have to talk. You cannot keep doing this. Like, do you want your kids to look back on this time and just say, oh, mom was always working? You don't want that. And I think that was the wake up call that I needed to realize, like, whoa, my loyalty has led me to really poor boundaries. And, I probably should have said no a number of times, but I think also there's the loyalty piece, there's the empathy piece. And I think the empathy side of me was also trying to protect other people on my team from being overloaded. And so I was taking on all of these things. And I think it ultimately led to that intervention with my husband and realizing he's right. I can't keep doing this. This is too much.
Thank goodness for some truth tellers to help us interrupt, because it's so hard to even know when you're in a habit and you're trying to take care of family duty, then you go back to work duty. And I'm just grateful for the people who love us enough to take us aside and tell us, like, no, not okay. We need to fix it. So yay for him. So Aarika, tell me then, you get this talk, right? And what did you do? I mean, you're still wearing the hats and 3 people's hats, and that's a lot of hats. So what do you do? They're so used to you operating at such a high level. How do you move forward?
Yeah. I think part of it was the culture of the organization at the time. It was not fully to blame, because I think ultimately that blame comes down to me. Like, I could have been the one to put my foot down or just say no to things, and I didn't. And I let it get to this degree. But I had a hard time figuring out how I was going to dig myself out of it, to be honest with you. Like, once you kind of set those expectations, it's really hard to pivot. And then coincidentally, an opportunity kind of came across my desk of executive director for Christy Yamaguchi's nonprofit organization, Always Dream. And it just was the right time in my life and kind of like the perfect synergies of everything kind of coming together. You know, people talk about the stars aligning. This was kind of one of those like stars aligned moments for me, because Always Dream is focused on literacy, which is something that I was already doing. They were doing work in the Bay Area, which is where I call home now, but also Hawaii, which is where I will always call home. And so, you know, seeing this opportunity that aligned so well to kind of my own story, but then also the timing of it, just, it couldn't have come at a better time for me. And I made that jumped into the interview process with them.
It's amazing, don't you think, that after that conversation with your husband, a few months later, this perfect job came up, and it was both passion and also location and an opportunity for you to turn over a new leaf and have this different life. So I actually want us to walk it through with you, because now you're ED, right? You're the boss to make things happen. And that starts with you. So how did you show up?
That talk from my husband definitely helps, because I had that in the back of my mind, kind of going into this role. And strangely enough, the recruiter who I worked with, who placed me in this position, she's like, you know, when I talked with your references, they all talked about how hard you work and that maybe you work too hard. And Aarika, it's important to work hard. And I have no doubt that that'll just always be who you are, but maybe take this as an opportunity to not work quite so hard. And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh my gosh, this stranger essentially saw this and is giving me this advice. I think maybe I need to make some changes. And so, you know, I think it started with, how do I set more boundaries around my time? You know, not feeling like I have to be on email all the time at all hours and drop everything for work, but really saying, no, like these are the times that I'm not available because I'm with my kids and I'm with my family, and prioritizing that. You know, slowing down and thinking about how do I work smarter? Because you can work hard, but you can also work smarter. And some of that came down to like how I was prioritizing my time, and does this really need to be a meeting, or could this be an email kind of a thing? You know, I think that was part of what got me into some bad habits at my last organization, was that we were so meeting heavy, and I was in meetings all day. And then when are you going to do all the work? Well, I guess after hours. And that's kind of one thing that I kind of put my foot down on and said, no, I need to be better about this. I need to be better about my time and how I'm using it.
I think it's hilarious, Aarika, that your recruiter sat you down and said, maybe you don't have to work so hard. I mean, that's said no one ever, right? Like recruiters are usually like, go hard because I want to look good. I hire good people who work hard. So that's hilarious that she was the one who had another conversation. So it's like your husband and the recruiter, and you're like, okay, I hear you, universe. You're trying to tell me something. And then I also wanted just to try to codify, because many of us struggle with boundaries, that boundaries are hard. I mean, it's so easy to say, but then to actually execute, it's really tough. So when you say prioritize, what did that mean?
I am very much a note taker and a to-do list kind of a person. And so I think I took that to heart. I also live by my calendar. And so I started to get really intentional about like blocking off like no work time, you know, after like 5 o'clock, or if I knew I had to pick up my kids that day. And I think that things like that have helped. I also think that, you know, just I'm at a smaller organization now with a smaller team. And so that just inherently means less meetings and more opportunity and time for me to do a lot of that deep strategic work that I had always really wanted to spend more of my time on, that I just hadn't been able to before. And now I can do that because I'm not so overloaded with meetings, but also really, you know, thinking through like, does this need to be a meeting? And then also, you know, thinking through like, does this need to be a really long, extensive email, or is this just a quick phone call? So I think part of it came down to, even just communication and how long I was taking for different things, and how to just be more efficient with my day.
Yeah, I'm imagining you had said earlier this idea of work smarter, not harder. So within the confines of the day, how do I use that time? Does it have to be in meetings? Can I just write an email? Is this email easier by phone? And then blocking time for the thinking, which it sounds like you really enjoy it. So it's probably a strength and joy of yours for creating space and thinking big picture. So how do you structure a day that actually reflects back stuff you enjoy, that has impact to the organization, and then is also communication efficient?
The calendar blocking, I think for me has been super helpful, where I will put work blocks on my calendar so that I try to group things strategically too. So like things that I know are just going to be quick tasks that I can just bang out pretty quickly, I'll kind of group those together. Things that are more deep thinking, I'll try to group that into a separate work block. And I think that that's helped. Again, work in progress. I don't think that I've mastered it by any means, but I think I'm been pretty good about sticking to it and trying. And I think I've held my boundaries around time a lot better than I have previously.
You had said earlier, Aarika, this idea that's not the organization, but it's actually your choice. And I think that's so powerful because often we can use this blame that, oh, my boss, if you were my boss, Aarika, Aarika, and the way that she runs this organization and the organization itself, that's the reason I have no boundaries and I can't have any time for myself. What would you say to that idea that I just shared with you, that it's all the organization, it's really not me, I can't help it, I have no choice?
It's hard because definitely there are going to be some cultures and organizations or companies that aren't going to be conducive and aligned to kind of what your personal values are. And I think that's part of the evaluation that you kind of have to take place for yourself, is like, is this the right fit for me? Am I getting the environment that I need? But I also think that it's easy for us to just put it all on the company instead of taking some of that ownership ourselves. And so if somebody came to me and said, I'm feeling really stretched and I don't think I have the capacity to take this on, even though you need me to, I would much prefer an honest and transparent conversation, because if that's going to help them be a stronger performer at work and happier at work, I think that's going to help with retention. That's hopefully going to help with their work product. I mean, I think there's so many things that come from that, but I recognize like that is hard. And also depending on your position in an organization or company, like you might not have that privilege and ability to try it, or to do it, but I guess try it and see what happens, would be my recommendation.
I just double click on that because one, there's the organization, right? Like there is, for example, in a school, there are certain hours that the students are there. You need to be there during those hours. And so you have to figure out if that environment and that organization is the right fit for you. And then second, you got to speak up, because if you don't even raise your hand to say, hey, there's an issue, let's talk about it, then how can we figure out how to make it work? So I really appreciate that these types of things that you're doing, Aarika, are not just for the ED or the head boss to just decide what they want and they can have the great life. It's possible for everybody. So I'm glad that we're mentioning that. And I also want to mention, Aarika, that as the head person, as a leader there, how do you think this affects your people when you lead in this way and you have boundaries? Like, in fact, could you share like an example that you had recently where you were asked after hours about some task and you didn't just, sit down at the computer right after dinner and just spend 2 hours on it?
Yeah. I mean, I think one example that comes to mind, I was in an email thread with a donor and we were kind of going back and forth. And then I had to step away. I had home responsibilities. I had to make dinner and I had to get my kids fed and work with my husband to get them ready for bed. And so, I was honest. And when I came back to it later, I know that, they probably were looking for a response sooner than like 3 hours later. But I said, I had family obligations to take care of. And then I responded. And I think that's a big part of it too, that I'm realizing is we shouldn't be apologizing for stepping away to take care of our families or our life, because I think that's part of who we are as people. And I think it's important for people to be reminded and see like there is life beyond work too. and, and, and so I think as a leader, that's one thing that I am really trying to demonstrate and lead by example on, is that, you know, I'm going to be empathetic to the fact that, you know, you have a family and you have kids and you have things. And, you know, if we can be flexible around certain things, then we will absolutely be flexible, because at the end of the day, you're with the people at, you know, at home or whoever you love and call family. And so, and those people are just as important as anything, more important than anything happening at work.
More important. I love that. And saying it out loud and saying it to your people. And then also saying it to your donors. I mean, frankly, that's a tough one to say, you know, hold on, I'm not going to be here immediately, because donors are a pretty high priority customer who you want to be happy so they can continue to contribute. And for you to stand in your belief that I'm going to be a mom now and I will talk to you in a few hours. That's great modeling. So I love that. And I love that you're modeling for your whole community. So I'm curious then, Aarika, in terms of how women, you know, people listening to this can have boundaries, better boundaries, any other ideas or strategies or tricks to share?
Yeah, I think it's all about identifying what's most important to you and kind of keeping that as your North Star. So I think I think back now to that conversation I had with my husband on the couch, and I think back to what the recruiter told me, and I use those things as my North Star, because I don't want my kids to look back on their childhood and say, Mom was always working. She was always on a call or at a meeting or in a Zoom meeting call or whatever it is. You know, I want them to think about, oh, Mom read me bedtime stories every night, or we had conversation at the dinner table. So I think just, you know, identify what matters most to you and keep that as your North Star. And I think that's really going to help you set and stick to your boundaries.
That's awesome. Aarika, now that you have much clearer, stricter boundaries, and we're all a work in progress, but now that they're stronger, I'm curious, what has it opened up for you to be a boss mama, you know, rocking at work, but also self-care and family?
Yeah. I cook dinner way more often than I used to, which I'd say that's probably a good thing. It means we're ordering less takeout. So I think that that's opened up. I mean, we've really always prioritized having dinner together as a family, but I think now we're not so focused on rushing through dinner. And I think I was the guilty party for trying to rush through dinner to get to bath time. And now, you know, spending more time talking with the kids and asking them how their were and what was the highlight, what was something that maybe wasn't so great, you know, just getting to know them better has been fun. And then personally, I think I've also made sure to carve out time to work out more. It was something I never prioritized before. And then realizing I'm a much happier person and I sleep better when I work out. So that's been, I think, an important thing for me too, that I've kind of built into that time that I've reclaimed.
That's awesome. I mean, we got to be honest here, right? Aarika, Analiza, when we are not taking care of ourselves, we're not the kindest people. We can be super cranky. So
Yeah.
That's super real.
That is real.
All right. With that, let's go to lightning round questions. Chocolate or vanilla?
Vanilla.
Cooking or takeout?
Takeout.
Climb a mountain or jump from a plane?
Climb a mountain.
Have you ever worn socks with sandals?
No, I'm from Hawaii. That's like a sin.
How would you rate your karaoke skills on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being Mariah Carey?
I'd say 6 because I come with a lot of enthusiasm.
Recent book you've read?
The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett.
What's a favorite way to practice self-care?
For me, I found it's doing bar workouts at least 3 times a week.
What's a good professional development you've done?
Actually currently in the Full Potential Leadership Program through Full Potential Ventures, and it's been incredible. It's a 10-month program, and you go through with a cohort, and it's been awesome.
What's your definition of a boss mama?
I think it's someone who doesn't apologize for having kids or having to step away to parent, but really embraces that as part of who they are, as part of their leadership and kind of what they bring to the job.
And what advice would you give your younger self?
Stop worrying so much.
And then where can we find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. You can find me. I don't know how you want me to talk through that.
I'll include it in the show notes. Thanks,
Okay.
Aarika. And then last question is, do you have a final ask, recommendation, or any parting thoughts for our audience?
I think be patient with yourself. It's hard to set those boundaries, and sometimes those boundaries you'll hold them really firm, and other times they'll waver a bit. Just don't forget to come back to that North Star to kind of reset.
Love it. Thank you, Aarika, for our time. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too, Analiza.